My name is Jaclyn Carter. I am an educational development consultant in the Taylor Institute for Teaching and Learning, and I work primarily with the Program Innovation Hub, supporting program development and innovation and also curriculum review. I am so delighted today to bring some experts together from the TI to discuss equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility in program design. And I'm going to let our guests introduce themselves in just a moment, but just a few quick notes before we get started. I just want to express my sincere appreciation for our ability to offer these workshops on such a sacred space and in the area of Treaty 7 and Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3, or I think it's now Districts 5 and 6. We are extremely privileged to be able to do this. I live about half a kilometer from the Bow River and get to see that land called Mohkinstsis on a weekly basis. So I just want to express my sincere gratitude for that. And I just wanted to offer a couple of quick notes connecting some of the practices of equity, diversity, and inclusion and accessibility, and the priorities, and sort of link them to sort of the larger institutional priorities we have, and then kind of narrow it down to how this affects program innovation at the University of Calgary. So this is from Ahead of Tomorrow, our new strategic plan. And one of the priorities in Strategy 1 is to create equitable and inclusive spaces for all with talent and ambition. And so it's a very broad commitment that we've made. And so I just wanted to speak a little bit more specifically about how that affects us in the Program Innovation Hub and when we're thinking about program development. And I've also noted here that one of the cross-cutting initiatives under this first strategy is to expand understanding of the university's foundational commitments, one of which, of course, is equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. And just to give you an idea of how this fits in with the program proposal development process, if you've submitted a proposal through to the governance process at the University of Calgary, you may have seen these questions come through. These come from the creation for new undergraduate and graduate programs. But really what I want you to take away from this is that we are asking these questions and asking proponents to think about how components like equity, diversity, and inclusion and accessibility are sort of meaningfully integrated throughout the program, whether that's how the institution is going to support students, how the faculty is going to support students, kind of situating EDIA in context within your discipline, and alignment with the strategic initiatives that we see. And this affects not only these proposals for new programs, but also not just new graduate and undergraduate degree programs, but we're seeing it as well in proposals for all kinds of new programs, minors, embedded certificates. It's a really important thing to think through, and we are seeing it more and more come up in conversation through the approvals process. And finally, I just wanted to direct your attention to an extremely valuable resource that I know Fouzia worked really hard to contribute to, and this is our recommendations for program proposal development. This is just a snapshot of what the guide looks like, but it essentially offers some guiding questions relating to several different program areas, including sort of that disciplinary context, how it will affect admissions, curriculum funding, etc. So it offers some guiding questions in each of those areas and then offers some recommendations for how to move forward and do this work well. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to turn it over to our presenters. So everyone, please welcome Fouzia and Jaime.
Great, thank you so much, Jaclyn. And I am going to go ahead and share my screen here. Oh, sorry. This is what happens when you're working with two monitors. Sorry, folks, just bear with me. Okay, I think folks should be able to see that. Perfect, great. Well, yeah, thank you, Jaclyn, so much for having us here today. As Jaclyn mentioned, I am Dr. Fouzia Usman. I am an educational development consultant with the Taylor Institute for Teaching and Learning. And in my role, I work to promote equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, and anti-racism across our teaching and learning communities. And I'm going to turn it over to Jaime for him to introduce himself.
Thank you, Dr. Fouzia. My name is Jaime Paredes. I'm a PhD student, almost candidate. Yeah, getting there. I'm also working as a research assistant at the TI with Dr. Fouzia. It's been a great experience. So yeah, I'm here and happy to see you all. And I'm here to walk you through all of these about EDI and program design. So yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Fouzia. Back to you.
Great. Thank you, Jaime. And thank you, Jaclyn, for setting the context there and providing some background information in regards to program design. So essentially what Jaime and I will be doing here for the next hour or so is to really walk you through some of the some strategies and some ways on how you can meaningfully embed EDIA within your program design, and not just into the program design, but how you can approach program design from an EDIA lens. And so from this session, what you can really expect is, first of all, to gain an understanding of program design from an EDIA lens, which is equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. And we will also explore program design using a 3M framework. And what we mean by that is basically looking at program design from macro, meso, and micro levels. And then lastly, we were also going to invite you to engage in some critical self-reflection, which is a key component of engaging with EDIA. It's important to critically reflect, not just individually in terms of our teaching practices or our pedagogical practices, but also related to our positionality and social identities, and how that in turn informs our practices as well. So we have a few slides here for you today, and we're just wanting to provide you with some context around that, some broader context around that. But we do want to leave plenty of time today for some discussion, and we are going to have you get into some smaller groups and provide you with some reflective questions to guide your discussions within those smaller groups, and yeah, address any questions that you may have towards the end of the session. So folks, let's begin with looking at approaching program design from a 3M framework, which is essentially the macro, meso, and micro levels, as I mentioned. So in doing so, we're not only exploring ways to meaningfully embed equitable and inclusive practices into the program, but also identifying where the inequities lie within the field and our institutional practices, and how we could close those inequity gaps through our program. And so at each level, EDI is approached by building partnerships, learning communities with students, faculties, and community members. So essentially, you are taking a partnership approach, an allyship approach throughout those three levels, where you're working in collaboration with either a specific individual or with groups of people. So beginning with the macro level, we are identifying the systemic inequities that exist within your field of inquiry or your specific discipline. So this is where you're essentially asking the question, who dominates the field and why? So for example, if there is a specific discipline and there's a lack of representation from women in that discipline, thinking about what makes that field inaccessible to women. So at the meso level, then we are essentially working to reduce and minimize the barriers we identified earlier. So we're carefully examining our institutional practices that may or may not be contributing to the systemic inequities we identified earlier at the macro level. So this is embedded through curriculum design and curriculum delivery as well, and also critical partnerships. And then at that micro level, where it gets a little bit more granular, we're looking to incorporate multiple perspectives and ways of knowing that are also reflective of students' experiences. So you're bringing multiple voices to the table, and you are meaningfully and intentionally embedding those voices, those experiences in students' learning experiences as well. So students are empowered to take ownership of their learning process. And in this process, it is also essential that instructors and those that are involved in the curriculum design process check their own biases and counter those assumptions actively. So this was just kind of like a snapshot, and we will get into more in depth into each of these levels. But before we do so, as I mentioned earlier, that it's really important that we engage in critical self-reflection when we are looking to work in regards to EDIA to meaningfully embed equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility within our work. So we got to shift gears here a little bit, and to center ourselves in the work of EDIA actively and meaningfully, it is important to begin by engaging in critical self-reflection. And we are going to examine our own positionality. And what that essentially means is that we're going to examine our own social location, which refers to a person's position in relation to others within a society. So it offers that that one's position or one's social identity is a result of combining various social factors or identifiers, including but not limited to race, gender, ability, sexual orientation, age, nationality, even religion, and so on. So as you can see from that figure that we have on the slide there, that you see these different identifiers, social identifiers that are listed there, like ethnicity, gender, age, and so on. And the way they intersect with each other, they then tend to inform our views, how we understand and experience the world around us, which also not only impacts our personal experiences, but how we bring that into our professional experiences as well, including our teaching and pedagogical practices as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Jaime to talk about this further.
Thank you, Dr. Fouzia. So really what we're looking here is where do we start and how do we start, right? So we start from what we know and who we are, right? So the goal here is really to develop a profound critical awareness that is cognizant of others' individuals' voices, engaging in respectful dialogue and allyship to address systemic barriers. So when you look at those reflective questions, for example, we're not only reflecting introspectively, but assessing our relationships with the people around us. And that's really important because how we frame EDI in program design is through relational lenses, right? So with that in mind, we would like you to engage in a self-reflective practice, or at least in an exploratory exercise. So I'm going to post 2 links on the chat in just a moment. The first link is a PDF developed by the TI, and the PDF has a sort of mind map that will help you think about some identities that come to your mind when you reflect on your own life experiences, who you see yourself, and also a series of follow-up questions to further reflect on your identifiers that you just added to the mind map. You don't have to complete it, but just explore it, okay? And the second link is an article that also framed the conversation about self-reflexivity and positionality through social identity. The article, the recommendation is just for you to scroll down and you'll see the template and then a couple of examples on how to engage in positionality. So I think both are really good. And I'm going to post the links right now in the chat. Turning back to you, Dr. Fouzia.
Great, thank you, Jaime. I really appreciate you walking us through that exercise. And every time I engage with this activity, I discover something new about myself. And just kind of like looking at things differently. The idea really is, that by reflecting on our own social identities, along with the disadvantages and privileges that it could lead to, it helps us to understand our own lived experiences better. And essentially, as we talked about earlier, that how does this then translate into how we approach teaching and learning and eventually even program design, right? Like all of those experiences, all of those lived experiences, it translates into those practices as well. So which is why it's so important to engage in critical self-reflection from time to time, just to understand our proximity to systems of oppression, our systems of power in terms of the disadvantages and the privileges that we might hold, and how does that then inform the work, and how does that even show up in our program eventually, right? So that was basically the first step of engaging in the work of embedding EDIA in program design, is to critically reflect on ourselves and also our biases that come with it. So then, now that we've done that, we're going to explore those 3 different layers of macro, meso, micro in a greater in greater depth now. And again, starting back with the macro level, which is, when we're exploring equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility on this level, it involves delving into the fundamental aspects of our discipline. So here we are essentially, again, asking that question, who dominates the field? Where does the power really lie? So we are identifying the systemic inequities that exist within our field, within our discipline, and we seek to articulate, uncover, and critically examine the nature of our field and the social responsibilities that are embedded within our academic pursuits. So simultaneously, our focus extends to recognizing and comprehending systemic inequities, not only within the broader field, but specifically within the framework of our own current program. So the macro level dynamics of EDIA emphasize a comprehensive understanding of how your discipline can contribute to fostering equitable practices on a much larger scale. At this level, at the macro level of EDI also requires becoming aware of how power operates to uphold the systemic inequities within the field or discipline. So for example, like we said earlier, if there is a certain field of inquiry or discipline where there's lack of representation of women, really thinking about the nuances and the complexities, the layers there. Why is it that that would be inaccessible to women, right? Like, why is it underrepresented to a specific group? So engaging with diverse voices and scholarships, it facilitates becoming aware of these power dynamics, leading to embrace those multiple perspectives, even in our curricular and pedagogical designs, hence informing the teaching and learning experience as well. And you'll see here on the slide that we've got some guiding questions here. So when you're thinking about things from a macro perspective, we have some questions here that would guide your thinking around this area. But later on, when we put you into groups, you will have the opportunity to explore these questions with your group members as well. So then moving on to the meso level, here we are essentially working to reduce and minimize the barriers through our program design. So now we are carefully examining our institutional practices that may or may not be contributing to the systemic inequities we identified earlier at the macro level. So this is also embedded through our curriculum design and through curriculum delivery as well. So at this level, there is this deliberate focus on cultivating individual and peer reflection and building critical allyships at the program and faculty levels. And we'll get to that term in just a bit. The program then actively shapes conversations around equity, determining approaches that align with our shared values. So additionally, as a comprehensive initiative, the program's curriculum is strategically designed to systematically confront and address systems marked by unequal power dynamics and oppression. So remember the reflection that you did earlier at the macro level, where you're looking at those inequity gaps within your field or within your discipline. Through the program design, you're going to actively look at how you can counter or address or close those inequity gaps through your program structure. So these considerations extend beyond the academic realm, of course, and then encompassing the program, faculty, and overall looking at culture, signifying a commitment to fostering an inclusive and equitable environment at multiple levels. Now, we do have some strategies here on how that can be achieved. And so the first key strategy is by developing critical allyships. Now, building allyships and or aspiring to be an ally may create space for peer support and consultation when you're identifying and addressing issues of power and privilege in your program design, such as racism, classism, ableism, sexism, heterosexism, within your specific program, faculty, or your work and community culture. So when you're co-reviewing, co-researching, co-designing, and even co-teaching, it might be strategies to strengthen your critical allyships and peer partnerships in academia. And so these joint efforts foster curricular and pedagogical changes that may decentralize academia's hierarchical structures and transform the institutional dominant culture. So then EDI is advanced through engaged, continuous relational efforts, including here at that meso level. And then secondly, we would like to direct your attention to the term radical listening. So with radical listening, what we mean by is like values are that all voices are heard through respectful dialogue, and it boosts individual and collective agency towards common goals and facilitates self-reflexivity and exploration of diverse perspectives when seeking alternative solutions. So as we mentioned earlier, like bringing multiple voices to the table, having that diverse representation at the table when it comes to decision making in terms of how the program is structured and what the program aims to then deliver. So when enacted, radical listening involves trying to adopt the speaker's standpoint. And instead of arguing against it, you're exploring all contributions, possibilities, and their complexities. So as you reflect upon this within your faculty or your institution, folks, think of a critical ally or allies who might encourage and challenge you to expand or reassess your program's underpinnings, who might become an accountable partner, or a co-lesson planner, or a critical ally providing feedback on your content and your pedagogical practices. So it could be within your program, within your faculty, or from another faculty, someone external to your institution as well. But someone that can provide you with that, a critical perspective in terms of how you can close those inequity gaps that we talked about earlier within your program structure. And I will turn it back to Jaime.
So I was saying, at the micro level, we're looking to incorporate multiple perspectives and ways of knowing that are also reflective of students' experiences. So for example, ways to empower students to take ownership of their own learning process, right? And another way to look at the micro level is through the idea of embedding students as partners in our programs in different capacities. So for example, we have students as consultants, co-designers, co-facilitators, right? So all those spaces where students can partner with the instructors, right? There is an example, for example, well, there is an example here. You can invite students who have signed for your class, and before day one, you can ask them, okay, look at the syllabus, look at the curriculum, and then they can provide feedback before the classes start. It's not that you can actually change the curriculum at that moment, but that feedback is going to be really important to inform your pedagogical commitments and how you're going to approach certain discussions. So it's just kind of placing, and this is just one example, students' feedback at the beginning of the course and not necessarily at the end. That is one of the experiences that I have had so far, that my feedback comes at the end. But it's just flipping it. It comes at the beginning, and that might change the whole perspective of how you approach the design of your program. There is another fascinating example, and we have different resources on the on this particular level, that is student-led, individually created courses. Also, the abbreviation is SLEEKs. So it's fascinating. At the University of Waterloo and Edinburgh, they're exploring this, and I like it because it's a very concrete example. So students partnered with the instructor in defining a learning experience, almost like a semester-long research proposal or capstone project. And they outline how they will complete it. They will also co-design with the instructor the assessing rubrics and all this, the milestones to complete it throughout the whole semester. So in that way, the students can actually assert their own agency and take ownership. And it has shown a huge impact in the students' engagement and how they perform in the class. So it's just creating that space to partner with the students and to engage in dialogue with the students, right? Which I think when it comes to what you do within the classroom, that is where the relational piece really comes to it, where you see it more concrete. So yeah, building these partnerships and creating this space to assert their agency is kind of the point of these at this level. We also have guiding questions to help you get started and frame your efforts, and also some resources and tools actually for you to address all of this and to incorporate all of this. And I think at this level, the micro level, is very concrete. The things that you can do, right? Because when you think about your pedagogical commitments, all of that is already embedded in how you are thinking on the program, on your curriculum, right? The spaces that you are creating when you write in the program that will translate on how you relate with the students and what they can actually do and how they can actually participate while in class and during the semester. So that's pretty much the micro level. I'm gonna turn the floor back to you, Dr. Fouzia.
Great, thank you, Jaime. And so folks, as we are going through these three different levels, the macro, meso, and micro, as you've noticed that there are guiding questions on those slides. We have talked a lot. So now we would like to give you some time to really noodle over these questions and to think about and to have some discussions with your peers here today. Some of these conversations are heavy. And that's the thing about, with EDIA, because it's informed by critical theory, some of the things that we have to really look at is also in terms of like the cultural, it's also the political and the historical aspects. So when we talk about historical, we're also looking at the effects of colonialism, for example, right? And then just that's embedded in our history, and how do the structures then support that? So it's like it's layers and nuances that we have to kind of go through as we are engaging in those conversations, and simultaneously to have supports in place to guide us through each of those layers as well. So that's definitely really important. We did share, like on the slides, there were a couple of resources that are available institutionally, but there are also ways that we can seek support external to the institution. So there are multiple resources available externally. And the good thing about this is that it doesn't have to be done in on your own, right? And then we've been stressing on the importance of co-relationality and to do this in collaboration with others and partnership with community members as well. So I really appreciate you highlighting that in regards to that two-step approach to this. So thank you for that. One of the groups noted about how are these conversations even being approached at the leadership level, right? How is this being pursued in those spaces, and how is this being talked about in those areas, right? So it's really important. Accountability, I agree, is a key part of this, and leadership in terms of like the conversations happening in those spaces around within leadership is also important to consider as well. So thank you. And I just wanted to point out something, an observation, I would say, it's usually, I won't say easier, but when we're reflecting on this process at the micro level, it's much more, well, I would say it's easier to engage at the micro level because it's at that individual level. And usually with EDIA, we tend to take that approach of it occurring at that micro level, right? And that's something that we wanted to highlight here today, is that it goes beyond that. It goes beyond our classroom spaces. It goes beyond the self. It extends further than that as well, right? So and I know that those are areas like at meso and macro level, because you're looking at systemic inequities, it's asking you to consider structures and systems of oppression and power. And those are some things that don't normally come to us. It doesn't come to us easily. Those aren't part of our everyday conversations. And so those are some questions that when we're thinking about it from a macro perspective, for example, it's really, you're kind of digging deeper into those complex layers that we talked about earlier. So So just wanted to reiterate that message here, folks, that it takes time, right? Like, and as we are kind of looking through those systemic processes, it takes time when we're unpacking this at the macro and even the meso level as well. Going back to like when we're unpacking or when we're learning more about our discipline and our field of inquiry, it is suggested that obviously we have to consult research, right? Again, and look at statistics and data, but there is bias in research as well, as you've highlighted and shared with us, and so even the sources that we consider is also really important, and in terms of again, whose voices are being elevated in that space, right? So even if you have research that is being conducted, and like you said, the sampling and all of those areas and components in terms of the participants also within that research, it's really important to think about the inequity gaps within that research as well that you've highlighted. So, and you're right, it's definitely not easy. And just navigating through those systems and navigating through that way can be quite challenging, but it is important work that has to be done. So thank you for highlighting that. And you're right, like these are also folks, I also wanted to stress that these questions, it's not directed to a specific discipline, so not necessarily within like the social sciences or anything of that sort, but also looking at like the different disciplines that we have, whether it's sciences or whether it's STEM or engineering, whatever it is, looking at those inequity gaps within those structures is important if we are to really embed EDI in our program design, to think about how we can then counter those inequity gaps through our program structure and what we deliver through that program as well. Jaime, did you have anything to add?
That reminded me of a really interesting research project that happened emerged in Spain, and it was it was kind of the same idea. How can we address these systemic barriers, particularly for Roma people? That was kind of the big deal there, and they come up with this research methodology, which is they call it a dialogic communicative research methodology. And what they did was pretty much open up the space to include Roma peoples in the design of the research itself. So they had the chance to actually design the instruments to collect data and also to interpret the data. They will be at both sides, right? They will participate, taking the survey. I think it was a survey and questionnaire at the beginning, but also designing the questionnaire. And they were at the table making decisions at the decision-making table. So that was from the design of the research side of things. They were already involved in it. And what that brought up was that the research was able to focus on what they actually needed, not what the researchers thought they needed, but actually what the community itself brought up. And they were part of it as co-researchers and also even as main researchers. The other side of it was like, because they were included, they also had training on researching. And that was really, really key to overcome some systemic barriers around how Roma people was included in the community. And that involved a huge effort linked with universities and schools. That was really cool. So I was just thinking about that when you were saying, what you were sharing, Dilawi. And I think it all comes down to that relational part, whether we're open to have those dialogues and engage in horizontal ways of actually think about academia, right?
Are there any other questions? Any other thoughts, closing comments? If not, I'll turn it back to Jaclyn.
There's just one comment in the chat, Fouzia. I'm not sure if you want to address that.
Oh, yes.
Close up.
And my observation is faculty focus on content, the what, of program curriculum design, whereas the EDIA indigenization may focus on how or why a program curriculum design. It's sometimes difficult to move between these questions. Very true. I agree with you. And it's usually that starting from that how and why of it all, then later on informs the what as well, right? And it's not linear in that way, right? Like it's fluid, like we tend to come back to it as well. So moving back and forth between that, especially at that program level, it can be challenging, and not so much when we do it like at a more granular level, like at the micro level, when we're looking, for example, at our own classroom or teaching practices. But at the program level, when we are, looking at different aspects within our program that is outside of curriculum or even curriculum content, for example, the admissions process and all of those things, exploring the how and the why, and then we find that it informs the what of it, but it doesn't just stop there. Like we do have to come back and forth between those areas. Like we have to be fluid in moving between those areas. So I appreciate your comment there. Thank you, Catherine.
All right, are there any final questions before we wrap up for today? All right, well, if everyone would please join me in thanking our presenters, Fouzia and Jaime. This is invaluable information for not just program design, but institutionally, and we really appreciate you sharing your expertise and all of these resources. So thank you very much. As I mentioned in the beginning, this will be recorded or has been recorded, so we'll get an edited copy of this up on the website. Sorry, my dog's barking in the background, as well as a couple of additional resources for you to take away. So thank you all so much for your participation and your engagement. We really appreciate it, and stay tuned for more program innovation workshops in the winter 24 term. Thank you so much.
Thank you, folks. Really appreciate your engagement.